Hello! We are live from an Airbnb in Oregon, which is so cozy, and it's along this, I think, Deschutes River, and it's really super nice. We really wanted to go live and talk to you guys because Awareness School starts a week from tomorrow, and it's always fun to talk about Awareness School and how it relates to your real life stuff, like the title of this video. A couple years ago, I shared it last week or the week before, how to deal with family members who are, you would label as a narcissist. And even in this most recent class, we had someone who, was heavily influenced by a parental figure that would be defined or described as narcissist. And so really Awareness School helps you with everything in your life, especially your relationships and how you and why do you do what you do as far as interacting with people? Why do you continue to do things that don't work? And really looking at why do I continue to do things that don't work, that don't make me happy, that don't fulfill my true values in life? It's like, if I don't look at it, I'm just going to keep doing robotic things. That's another point of Awareness School, is learning how to not be a robot and kind of learning how to become a real person who does things that make sense, that enrich your experience, not just because. I just do this just because. And so if you have questions, please feel free to comment with questions or experiences as we go through the video tonight. We love when people participate.
Yeah. So, the narcissist topic's pretty fraught. Most of the
husband. My blanket. We've got a husband.
Okay. But it's a pretty fraught topic, and most of the conversations that I see happening on it are I perceive to be suspicious, right? That there's probably some nonsense that's going on there. And that's not to say that the person in question doesn't exhibit narcissistic patterns, but when something becomes sort of part of popular jargon or whatever, there's this, and then, I know this person's a narcissist and that person's a narcissist, and then there's all this kind of commiseration about how awful it is or how tough it is. My mother's that way and all this different stuff. And you can be correct in your assessment of a person, or you can be correct in your assessment of their behavior, like my fluorescent hand wrap here, a mystery entry. Stick around and I'll tell you about it. What if I just made that up? You can be correct in your assessment of a person, and that assessment can still have elements that are not useful, or missing elements that would be useful if you were to add them in. And so that's kind of, when we get into this stuff in Awareness School, we're not really talking about, well, here's 7 steps to dealing with your narcissistic blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. It's, let me talk to you, let me hear you talk about them. In some cases, let me watch you talk to them and actually get really good at assessing exactly when something is going on that shouldn't be going on, and assessing exactly what specifically is wrong with what was just said just now. What is it about that interaction? What is the false assumption? What is the false premise on which that specific interaction was based? And once you get really good at that, you can start to make meaningful progress towards some kind of improving change. Now, the improving change may be that you no longer have a relationship with that person, or that you no longer interact with that person on a regular basis. I think that is an acceptable outcome, and I think sometimes that's pretty much the best you're going to get. But what you don't want to do is that you don't want to continue getting involved with another person and then going home and complaining about how they're a narcissist. Do you know what I'm saying? You don't want to just understand the same old experience that you've always had of this person and all of the suffering that comes along with it. Just understand that through the framework of, they're a narcissist, that's what's wrong with them. There's something sloppy about that diagnosis, or that assessment, or whatever you want to call it. I'm much more comfortable if I know exactly why I don't like what you're doing. I don't like what you just said. Now let me explain to you why I don't like what you just said. And I'm actually interested to hear what you have to say in response to that. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you say to the other person. They're going to respond to you in the way that they respond to you, kind of regardless of the you that they're responding to, or the behavior of yours that they're responding to. That's kind of one of the hallmarks of dealing with these narcissistic people, is that their interactions with you don't really have a whole lot to do with a reality that exists outside their head. It's got to do with the reality that exists inside their head, so that you get negative reactions to them, not to the extent that you do things which are inappropriate, or not to the extent to which you refuse to fulfill requests that are reasonable, you tend to get negative reactions to them to the extent that the things that you say and do threaten something about their understanding of reality or about the way things should be. The clearer you get on exactly what's wrong with specifically what they're doing now, the more comfortable you'll be addressing it with them, letting it go, and or possibly deciding that you need to do something about the dynamic in the relationship. Possibly, I need to not interact with this person anymore. The clearer you can become on the pattern level. Because if you get stuck in the content is often outrageous and distracting. We were trying to have a nice vacation together, and my mother just all of a sudden perceived the slight, and it blew up. And it's so dramatic, it's so unpleasant, it's so traumatic in certain circumstances. It's emotionally overwhelming, but it's not oftentimes really clear. Like you know what they're doing is absolutely crazy, but it's like, how exactly did we go from that? And as you get really specific clarity on what the patterns are, it becomes really difficult for you, no matter how inclined towards guilt, no matter how inclined towards what they call codependency, right? No matter how inclined towards feeling bad about how you making a smart choice might negatively impact the other person, right? No matter how inclined to doing those things you are, when you can really see at the pattern level what's going on here, it's very easy to make the smart choice, even if the smart choice is, I can't have anything to do with this behavior anymore. If that means having nothing to do with this person, or if that means interacting with this person in a fundamentally different way, that's what I'm going to do. And so I think that's a wonderful place to get to, so that you are kind of like oil and water for these really pathological dysfunctions, so that there's nothing personal about it. You're literally incapable of engaging in or in persisting in ongoing dysfunction with other people, which is nice.
That dynamic sounds so foreign to me. I think she was talking about when you can describe to a person what's going on, or
right.
what. I am rarely allowed to communicate my experience without a tantrum in response.
Okay.
But this is also, I can't leave my husband. I'm financially dependent on him, pregnant with 2 kids already.
Well, and so there are constraints in that situation where I would say that it would be extremely difficult. I mean, I don't know your business, right? But in general, it would be very difficult for you. It would require an arrangement of life or sacrifices, not only for you, but also for your children, that you may not be willing to accept the cost of at this time. It's perfectly conceivable to me that a person who is reasonable and not like BSing and not making excuses, that a person would find themselves in a position where it's like, this is really shitty, but tactically for me right now, for my well-being, for my children's well-being, I'm not in a position to get out right now. If I were in that situation, and if I would say to myself, am I absolutely sure that it not only is impossible to ever communicate with this person, it's impossible to even make it so that it would become possible to communicate with them, I would be thinking in terms of exit strategy. Even if it was a 5 or 10 year plan, I would not just consign myself to a lifetime of that. I can't leave my husband right now. I can't leave my husband yet. I would, and I would spend time too doing 2 things at once, right? Really trying my best. Is it possible for me to perceive experience and respond to him in a different way? Is it possible? Let me see if I can do that. Not put all my eggs in that basket. Not blame myself if my attempts to do that don't work out. Let me do everything I can to make my life, my experience now as pleasant as it can be. And let me also be building a little escape pod or thinking because this is not like 1700. So that we are in a time where things are possible for people now that probably they weren't possible in the past. And even if they're not possible for you, it's like it's possible for you to make those things possible. I think remaining really dynamically engaged with that situation is probably your best bet, almost regardless of what the specific details of your situation are. You don't want to just settle down into that thing that just goes, he's a narcissist, that means I can't do anything about it, I can't leave, that means I'm stuck with this forever, that's just what my life is. I don't think you're going to like...
Oh no, what have I done? Oh no, it's too weird. Please make it go away. Okay.
No? Oh, look, there you are. Well done. I would have panicked. I wouldn't have been able to figure out.
No, that would have been too weird to leave on. What did someone else say? They had a comment. Dealing with a sibling like this, I'm so hesitant to label them, though.
Yeah. Well, I don't label people for the most part. I try to identify behaviors. And that's the whole thing. Oh, that's a narcissistic behavior. Or that is an unresourceful behavior that one would be forgiven for calling narcissistic. A lot of people would call that narcissist. And that's the thing for me is that there is a the labels can be useful, but probably 85% of the time they're not. Because if you need the label, then oftentimes you lack the kind of deep, sophisticated understanding of phenomenological reality. And what I mean by that is, what specifically is that person doing right now? Mm-hmm. What are they doing right now? Oh, this is what they're doing. Here's what's wrong with that. What's weird about that is that they asked me to do something, and I wasn't willing or able to do that thing, and they made my unwillingness or my inability to do that all about them, and they made it negative. Or, they're threatened by me going out and being happy because I'm talking about my experiences. I'm not talking about them. That compromises them. They are not respecting my life choices because in their mind, my life choices are just a subsidiary of their identity. I'm their child. And so if I'm doing what they think is right, that constitutes evidence that they're okay, that they're good, that their mother was wrong about them when they criticized, or some crap like that. So when you can actually see specifically what's going on that doesn't work for you, or what's going on that's not accessible for, or not acceptable to you, you can just reject that. And you don't have to get into the labeling thing, because a lot of times when you have to label the other person, there's this sense in which you prove too much, like you have to prove too much. It's very hard to prove what a person is. It's much easier to accurately describe in an undeniable way what the person is doing. And then if the person has a tantrum, you stay calm and say, see, I described to you what exactly I thought was going on, and then you had a tantrum. Do you see that? They may not admit that they see it, but that's I think one of the things is that the narcissistic person, the emotional volatility is something that they use to kind of be the center of emotional gravity in the room. And that they can just flip out. And if they flip out or throw a tantrum or whatever, even if you don't get into a screaming match with them, you're so shaken and emotionally upset that in a sense you kind of thrown off balance. If you're going to interact with these people, I found it very useful to develop the ability to stay completely calm in the midst of their tantruming, their anti-upping, and all that different stuff, because eventually it falls apart. Because they can't just go on. And if
they call that gray rocking.
Is that what that is?
Well, yeah, if you stay really
it's got a stupid word for everything. And the thing is that when you know exactly what they're doing, you can remain psychologically uninvolved with it, and eventually you become less and less emotionally responsive to it, because there are things that they do to draw you emotionally into the stuff. And this is one of those things too. So some people will draw you into their bullshit by presenting the bullshit to you in a way that is persuasive. That's the person who shames you and says, oh my God, you hurt my feelings so bad. And by the end of their little spiel, you feel guilty. You one, you believe they feel bad. Two, you believe it's your fault that they feel bad and you feel awful. Okay, you've been drawn into their bullshit. The other thing, though, is that when you recognize, to some degree, I know that this is bullshit right now, right? But maybe you don't have the ability to describe it to them. Or more importantly, and this is when it's really frustrating, you don't necessarily have the ability to articulate it to yourself in a completely kind of clear, like, I know that you're doing it, but God, I don't know, how do you do this? But I know what you're doing is wrong, but I don't know exactly what's wrong. That's like when you get very upset, then you're getting drawn into their bullshit because you know it's bullshit, right? And that's really frustrating to you. In either case, though, they're the center of emotional gravity. They're more powerful than you are. The insane person is more powerful than the sane person, which creates an ongoing dynamic that's really undesirable. Developing that ability just to go mad without emotionally resisting it, you don't want to predicate your understanding of what they're doing on their willingness and their ability to understand what they're doing. That's another thing too. These people play this game with you, and the game is called, this is off the table, no one ever says this, you can't make me understand this. I'm really good at not understanding your perspective. I'm really good at not understanding you have a perspective. And so if I don't understand it, then the fact that you don't understand it doesn't count, because I know I have more emotional endurance than you do. I know I'm more emotionally powerful than you are. I know I'm willing to say and do things you're not willing to say and do. So at the end of the day, if you need me to understand how wrong what I'm doing is before you're able to act on your understanding of how wrong what I'm doing is, guess what? I win anyway. Ha ha, it doesn't matter. And when you get to the point where you are free from the mistaken belief that you need them to understand what they're up to, then all of a sudden things start becoming interesting, because they lose one of the lures that they use to draw them into their nonsense.
Whew. What constellation is narcissism, and can it be resolved? Can my sister change? Well, there are, just like any, it's like a combination of constellations, and so depending on the flavor of narcissist, but generally it's going to be double self-devaluation, so megalomania, so thinking I'm the center of the universe and everything revolves around me, I'm the most important one, and I can do no wrong. And then also an aggressive constellation, which we recently did a class on that, which is territorial anger and an identity conflict. And the identity conflict, when that one gets stepped on, that person gets manic. And so this is where they, like you mentioned, they use other people to define themselves. And so if their identity is threatened because of the way that you're treating them, because of your, absence in their life, or, how infrequently they see you, whatever. I had this thought yesterday when we were kind of talking about this idea that, people who, you can tell when someone is using you as a role, right? That I need you because it props up my identity. Right. I need you I need you to be doing and saying and behaving in certain ways, because if you don't do and behave in certain ways, my identity is threatened at a fundamental level, and that is destabilizing for me, and that makes me aggressive, right? It's an identity conflict, and so that's why they need the people in their world to always be a certain way. And so Michelle asked about how does one know if one is a narcissist or not, and so paying attention to your identity and when it feels threatened, and when you feel like, if it's your children, if it's your husband, if it's your mother-in-law, if they are, if you feel like your identity, like, oh, I'm a good mom, or if your kid is doing something and then you feel like that's threatening your identity, it's not even that you're just worried about them, it's you're worried about like the appearance of it. You're worried about how what your child is doing is reflecting on you as a parent, as a Christian, as a whatever. And so you need them to act in a certain way for your identity to be okay, because otherwise you don't feel okay unless the people in your world are treating you as you think they should be treating you. And as soon as there's a violation, that's when that person explodes and becomes very unreasonable. And so, these are some things that you can observe in yourself. When do you get aggressive? When do you, what exactly do you not like about your husband's behavior? What exactly do you not like about your children? And what is that really about? Is that about anything that's rational, or is it about propping up your identity?
Mm-hmm. I mean, one little test you can do is, to what extent am I, on average, aware of the distinction that exists between my perception, my experience, and reality? Because for a lot of people, if there's synonymy between my perception, my experience, and external objective reality, like they're pretty much one thing, then it becomes very easy for me to become practically detached from the reality of your perception and your experience. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had this before, but there are people who will, they will interact with you as though you don't have an experience, or as though your experience does not matter, or as though your experience is relevant only inasmuch as it conforms to reality as they perceive it. So that if they perceive their behavior as appropriate, and you experience their behavior as hurtful or inappropriate or whatever, they do this thing where they go, they don't acknowledge the fact that you're saying you feel a way. And and I'm not saying they're going, listen, I hear that you feel that way, I'm sorry that you feel that way, I'm not sure that's totally legitimate, or I think maybe you're, assigning a meaning or reading something into it that's causing you to feel that way in a situation where, maybe you don't have to, or maybe it doesn't make sense, or something like that. They don't do that. They literally delete the data that you give them, indicating that you're upset. Because if you're being upset suggests a reality that is not consistent with their perception, they don't respond to it at all. It's as though it doesn't exist. And you want to talk about just sort of like classic narcissism, I am incapable of interacting with the reality of you to the extent that the reality of you does not conform to the perception of reality that I have inside my head. So, I'm here talking to you, and I've got a model of reality inside my head, and everything that you feed to me, here's what I think about what you said, here's how I feel about what happened, here's what I think should happen next, here's what I want to do with my life, here's my opinion about this, that, the other thing. Before I'm able to respond to that, I have to confer with my internal model, and I have to go, okay, is what she's saying consistent with my model? Is it okay? Is it going to conflict? And if it's inconsistent, I either ignore it, I discount it in a way that delegitimize your feelings. And this is, a lot of times the really frustrating, like take a moment and say, think about who you think is a narcissist or who you suspect might be. And think about the really, like, not the explosives, right? But like the really just unpleasant recurring patterns. Like, what is it, like, that is so unpleasant about interacting with these people? What is it? And a lot of the time what it is that they seem unwilling or unable to interact with the reality of you. Or that their willingness or their ability to interact with the reality of you is highly conditional. Meaning that if the reality of you doesn't contradict or compromise some pre-existing commitment they've got inside their head about the way you should be, about the way things should be, about the way a daughter should, but whatever, right? Then they'll interact with you. But if, like you said, stepping on a trigger, stepping on a track, if you all of a sudden have an opinion about something or engage in a behavior about something that violates their model, they don't come and say, hey, something that you did kind of violated my model. Remember, they're completely unaware of the distinction between their perception, their experience, and reality. So when the reality of you violates something about their ideas about the way things should be, or when something about the way you are is associated with a negative experience they have inside, remember, if they have a bad experience inside, that means there's something wrong out here. Right? So that if you say or do something and I have a bad feeling inside, I'm angry, I'm offended, I'm hurt, I'm whatever, there is no thing that goes, oh, let me talk to them about that to understand what's going on. I go, no, what they did is associated with a bad feeling for me. That means they shouldn't have done it. And the thing is, chosen that man, have that sexual proclivity, wear that shirt, eat out for lunch as often as they do. We've had instances where grown women with multiple children tell us about how their mother informs them that they should not be eating lunch out on the town as often as they do. And that's like, there's this idea, like, I guarantee you in that woman's head, there is no awareness whatsoever of, like, she says, God, it seems like my daughter's eating out to lunch a lot. That's way more than I do. It's way more than I did when I had as many children as she did and all that different stuff. That's interesting. I feel like she shouldn't be doing that. Oh, that's my opinion of another person, and they are an adult, and maybe it's not my business, and maybe it's okay that I feel this way. Maybe I don't need to feel this way. Maybe I feel this way for some weird reason, like I don't have enough other things to do. Maybe I'm overly involved. But even if I do have a good point here, maybe minding my effing business is probably more important than conveying this opinion. That doesn't happen. There is none of that. There is a straight line between perception, experience, and behavior. So that if they perceive the daughter's, doesn't matter if the daughter's 37 years old, they perceive the daughter as behaving inappropriately, that immediately manifests as a phone call or a text message on the RE, the frequency with which the daughter chooses to go out to eat for lunch, which is nuts, right? But if you understand it's coming from, there's absolutely, they never once stop to consider. Doesn't it all start to make so much sense? That like if you, even if you haven't taken awareness school or some other personal growth thing, and you don't sit around all the time saying, well, that's my perception, but then there is reality which is different, and even if they're related, there are people who have an intuitive sense. There's the way I see things, there's the way another person sees things, there's probably the way that things kind of objectively are, right? And, relationship harmony is kind of, striking a nice balance between those things, There's people who have that sense, and then there's people who don't. There's people who live in a world, there's people whose model tells them that their model is reality. So that if they see something as inappropriate, it is inappropriate, and that's all there is to it. And anybody who doesn't immediately acknowledge it is a bad person, or is being dishonest, or is morally corrupt, or whatever. And if you're dealing with a person who sees the world that way, and you don't address that issue, that fact, address it with them, address it within yourself, recognize it within yourself. Again, know exactly what's going on when these people are exhibiting this freakish behavior, so that you can be psychologically uninvolved in it, emotionally uninvolved with it. Maybe you say, I can't interact with that person and not get drawn into that stuff. I have to not get drawn into that stuff. I have to not interact with that person.
Megalomania makes sense, but what creates that? So that's a double self-devaluation. So they got one self-devaluation from their father and another self-devaluation from their mother, and so they felt double beat down, double devalued, creates the biological adaptation of megalomania because it gives you a chance to get out of it. So if you have one self-devaluation, you're feeling really down, you're feeling really devalued, but if you get another, boom, all of a sudden you think that these things are not right that are happening to you because you're the best. Another constellation I think is involved, at least with some people, someone mentioned sociopath too. That's when you have a cerebellar constellation, which is a feeling attacked, conflict and another feeling attacked conflict. And it also could be a double worry conflict with the breast glands. So basically when the cerebellum is in constellation, there is emotional numbness. There's this unfeeling inability to reflect on, you know, how another person is, like lack of empathy.
And that's a really interesting one. So the person will understand intellectually what you're saying, but they will display a lack of emotional responsivity to the gravity of what you've articulated. Like if you're saying, when you behave that way, you make me feel absolutely miserable, and here's why. Like, you're not blaming them for it, but you're like, it makes me feel like I'm going crazy when you act that way. And the person goes, oh, okay. But you know, and maybe they even say the words that indicate, but that there is that lack of emotional responsivity, which is to say that, like, if I understood what you're claiming to understand about what I just said to you about how your behavior makes me feel, there would be some emotional expression, even if that emotional expression was heavy silence. This is nonchalant silence, which suggests an inability to make that contact. One of the, I honestly, and I think this is a pretty interesting thing with constellations and probably with the narcissist thing, what people are emotionally responsive to. I mean, they sure as hell are emotionally responsive to perceived slights from you, or disrespects from you, or the waitress didn't do something quite right, or, you know what I'm saying, we invited you over but we didn't vacuum before you got here, or we invited you over but we didn't step in and defend you when so-and-so said such and such. And, you know, but very emotionally responsive to that. But if you, the daughter, explain to the mother, listen, it makes me feel like I'm going to throw up when you come over because I'm so nervous because how unpleasant everything is, and they go, oh, I hear what you're saying, yes, I'm sorry about that. Or, you know, that's an interesting thing too. And understand that you're interacting with a system that is, in some ways, like super defective. Like, this is not a person who makes a mistake sometimes. This is a person, there's something wrong with their circuitry. Now, when I'm saying circuitry, I'm not making like a hard neurological, what I'm saying is that they've got criteria for emotionally reacting to things, and that causes them in many cases to be unresponsive emotionally to things that like a normal person would be responsive to. What you don't want to do as their daughter is to get your feelings hurt by the fact that that's the way, because if you process that at a personal level, oh, my mother doesn't love me, and then it becomes, oh, maybe if I were different, my mother would love me better. You know, it's kind of like if there's something wrong with the steering wheel of a vehicle, it's not responsive. You could put like a Formula One racer in the vehicle. It's not really it's because it's not a skill issue, right? There's something wrong with the way the thing responds. There are people who are like this. And I think a lot of times people take this kind of humanistic approach. Well, let me articulate to them how I feel, and then everything will be okay. And it's like, no, the problem is that they're unresponsive to how you feel. Their model does not allow them to be emotionally responsive to the appropriate things, and it causes them to be hyper emotionally reactive to inappropriate things that aren't that important. And the model has something built into it that goes, I'm not a model, I'm reality, don't question me, attack anybody who makes you want to question me. And that's one of those things too, that those tantrums that someone alluded to earlier can be usefully understood as the model's attempt to maintain complete dictatorial control over that person. Think it's like an idol that wants to be regarded as a god. I mean, think if objective reality is kind of God, let's just say, right? And then the model is kind of an idol. It sort of is a condensed representation, not the real thing. It wants to be the real thing, though. And so these models want to be regarded as, and this is the thing too, like you said, double self-devaluation. That's a traumatizing thing. I'm getting attacked from here. I'm getting attacked from here. Basically, I think in life, people either learn how to get their feelings hurt, or they become a monster who's incapable of having their feelings hurt. The constellation kind of could be regarded as the latter, right? And so you really
want a little bit of both, you know, right, depending on. Yeah, go ahead.
And so you really want to learn how to get your feelings hurt. Yeah, and it's much easier to understand. But you know what's really great for learning how to get your feelings hurt? Understanding there's a difference between your perception and reality. Understanding that when you ask somebody out on a date and they say no and you feel totally crushed and rejected and all of that, that a lot of those feelings are coming from how you're processing and perceiving. It doesn't mean that they would never be interested in you. It doesn't mean that no one will ever be interested. So learning how to get your feelings hurt means understanding where the hurt feeling is coming from. And part of it's coming from outside, part of it's coming from inside. Or you can just get so upset that you just freak out and your mind does a hard reboot, and all of a sudden now you're one of these people who is basically, I touched reality once and it hurt, so I'm never going to touch reality again. And I'm going to live in a world, and this is that thing too, there's a sense in which the constellation is a choice to live in a fake world full of fake hurts, rather than to live a full life in which you might occasionally encounter a real hurt. So there's the constant offense, there's the constant anger, there is the self-indulgent guilt that the people will sometimes lapse into. But there's never that real, frank communication where, like, you come to them and say, hey, I want to talk to you about something. And they go, oh, okay, what is it? And you describe your experience. They hear it, they process it, they respond to it, and however they do in that moment. It's always on their terms. It's always this delusion, like the megalomania thing, the I'm flying high, I'm everything, or, oh, I'm so sorry, I did the best I could. But it's always this egocentric, narcissistic them trip. They're always kind of running that show. Now, here's the thing. You can't always be running the show and have any kind of authentic relationship or intimacy with another person, because that relationship and that intimacy, and this doesn't have to be like touchy-feely stuff. I sit down with you and I want to know what you think about the direction that we're taking the business, and I'm interested in how you feel about it and what you'd like to do and what your reservation. I don't know where that's going, because that's a genuine information gathering exercise, and I am exposing myself. I'm sending out an invitation that goes, tell me what you think about this thing. I don't know what you think about this thing. I'm really interested in what you think. I'm not running the show. I'm open. I'm being vulnerable. I'm opening myself out. That's what these people don't do. That's why it feels like you're talking to a wall, because you are, because it's like the level of control that they're addicted to is a level of control that doesn't allow them to be ready to hear something from you that they weren't expecting, and then to go, you know what? I don't know what I think about that. Hang on. And sometimes in a relationship, we'll do, like in our conversation, we'll do that. Like, it's like, that's interesting. Hang on a second. Okay. And it's kind of like, oh, I don't actually. And if you ever listen to podcasts, there are people who always act like they know exactly what they're talking about, and who always act like they have a response for everything that comes up. And then there are people who are very honest, and they say, you know what? I haven't thought about that. That's interesting. Huh. And then they'll say, well, I'm thinking on the fly here, but here are some of my initial impressions. And they'll be candid about that. And that's an honest person, right? And a lot of the time you're dealing with people who don't have a psychological structure that makes honesty an emotionally viable thing for them to be involved with. It feels very unsafe, very destabilizing.
Wow, thank you so much. Do people come out of it? And is there a big healing phase? So with constellations, often, and depending, certain constellations, you kind of, once you alter your reality in that way, often it stays altered, but it can be extremely accentuated, and it can also be very much downgraded. Some can be resolved, especially if they happened recently. If it's been a long-standing thing, typically a person's going to be navigating within the constellation, which means understanding your tracks. And yeah, that's something that a person helps to be aware. Ooh, I have these tendencies. Ooh, I have these tracks. Ooh, I have these reactions. That came up a lot in that identity conflict class of like, noticing when I get aggressive about, I don't like the way you're seeing, like, notice that. That's your work to do.
Yeah.
Can a narcissist develop paranoid schizophrenia, or is it just a delusion? Do those diagnoses ever overlap? So the thing with constellations, all constellations are what we call schizophrenia, because there's a manic version of it and there's a depressive version for every constellation. The manic, obviously, that's when the conflict that's on the left side of the brain, when that one is accentuated, the person becomes manic and, physically aggressive, or, overt and loud and extroverted. And then the depressive side, that's the right side of the brain, the person becomes quiet, more withdrawn, maybe self-harm. I mean, it's outward or it's inward. And so all constellations have a schizophrenic aspect to them, depending on which track tends to be amplified. And so that's, the diagnosis. All mental health diagnoses are basically various constellations combined together.
As far as I can tell, there's not like a perfect one-to-one. Like if you're talking about medical, like psychiatric diagnoses, you're not always necessarily going to have like a match one-to-one with like what GNM has to say about it. To the extent that they're both describing the same reality, people acting nutty. I mean, it's kind of, just enjoy, what I mean? Like just, what's that? What's this? There are instances, right? So like in some of the GNM literature, like you'll look at it and you'll say people who are diagnosed as being this, here's the GNM understanding of what's going on with them. But there are sometimes like the divisions that are theorized in psychiatry, some of those divisions fall apart. Mm-hmm. And then there are also, I think, certain distinctions that GNM makes about what's going on with people that may be absent in psychiatry. So it's, you know what I'm saying? It's one of
Yeah.
those things where the organizational frameworks often overlap, but where sometimes the distinctions drop away or distinctions are made in one, whereas they're not made in the other one.
Yes. So what do we do if this is our boss? He prefaced a conversation as, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong, and then he attacked me. What can I do?
I mean, you're not going to, I mean, I think even if it was your father, if it was your mother, practically, you're not going to fix these people. You aren't going to fix these people. Are they capable of being helped? Maybe. Are they likely to be? So what's theoretically possible for a narcissist? I think a lot. I think that in theory, right, almost, if I could spend enough time with almost anybody, I believe that I could force that person to see what they need to see. I think that's true. Now, maybe that's a little megalomania myself, but who knows, But but here, something that's really important, and I found this to be true in my life. I'm a big believer in basically infinite possibility in theory. I also, though, have noticed it's really important that you balance that infinite open-ended possibility with a sober appreciation of what's probable. And when it comes to this stuff, what's probable is that they will stay exactly the way that they are, plus or minus, as their kind of biological life plays out its normal thing. And in general, to the extent that you attempt to change them or make them better, you are participating in their activity and you are becoming your version of them. If I were the child of a narcissistic parent, right, and I said, I want to become a narcissist just like my parent, but in a way that I don't see coming, I would set about to try to make my parent see the light and stop being such a narcissist. Because it is psychological involvement, it is emotional involvement. You are climbing down into the tar pit, and you're trying to drag I mean, imagine climbing into a tar pit and trying to get a person out of it. How hard that is, and how perilous that is, and how risky that is, and how low the chances of success are. Now imagine that person doesn't want to be dragged out of the tar pit. Imagine that person's identity hinges upon staying inside that tar pit, right? Imagine that they feel a sense of moral superiority as a result of being in that tar pit, right? And so, and then imagine that at some sick level, they want to turn you into them. And a lot of the time, the way they turn you into them is that they kind of signal to you, if you just explain it to me one more time in the perfect way, with a little more compassion and a little more patience, I might see it. I might allow myself to see it this time. Try it one more time. And you don't understand that that's a slot machine in Las Vegas saying to an old lady who just spent all of her inheritance and all of her husband's, all of her whatever, all of her money on the slot machine, saying, pull the arm one more time. You might win. You might win. There is a sense in which these patterns come to function exactly like an energy suck. And one of the nice things about awareness is it gives you the ability to step back at intervals and go, wait a minute, is there something wrong with me that at this point in this relationship, I'm still entertaining fantasies about the possibility of intervening here and getting this thing to change? What if my desire to help this person, what if this is how I participate in this family system dysfunction? Like, what if this is the role I'm playing with? What if there's a big play called narcissism that's going on, and that person's playing the role of the narcissist, and I'm playing the role of the loving sibling who just wants to have a good relationship? But all of those virtuous desires are sort of, what are they doing? They're sort of driving forward persistent, belligerent, insistent folly. I'm not cleaving away from the sickness. I'm staying involved with it because I want to, in my mind, I'm rescuing. But in fact, what if I'm doing is sort of psychologically contaminating myself? And this is one of those things for awareness that's so powerful. It's how big of a life would I need to go build so that I was incapable of being involved with this stuff at all? That's kind of a big thing too. So when it comes to people in general, but especially people like bosses, I mean, I would say you handle it. You manage that person. Mm-hmm. You understand that person has, I mean, and with the boss, I think the thing is, derive no pleasure from your diagnosis of him. Derive no pleasure from your assessment of him. Be really curious about what you need to understand about the way his mind works in order for you to get as much of what you want out of your job experience and as little of what you don't want as you possibly can. This is a situation where, we're think of it in terms of managing a wild animal. It's like the more competent I am with interacting with this person, the better able I'll be to get what I want out of these exchanges. While and some of it may be honestly just letting him bullshit. Some of it may be he has to go through a ritual called "I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong." Now if what he's doing is treating you inappropriately or something like that, you're probably going to need to get to a point where you're able to involve someone other than him, who is willing and able to do something about whatever his misconduct is, because he's probably not going to see it.
Okay, so can I send my husband to meet with you so you can fix him? He might agree because he does fear hell, LOL.
Well, I send people there if they don't get better, so we'll have a good matchup. I mean, the thing is, it's a person who wants to take an adventure, and the adventure is it's not called let me figure out how to not be an asshole to my wife. Like, it can't be that. It's got to be I really want to explore a new reality. Like and like for him, it's not because I want to treat my wife better so that she hates me less or whatever. I want to know if it's possible for me to experience this relationship in a new way. Like, what if it's possible for me to hear what my wife has to say and disagree with it? And maybe even think that, maybe she's blaming me. Maybe she's out to get me. And if I feel that way, I say, I get the sense that you're kind of out to get me. Maybe you are. I don't know anything about you guys. You might be the narcissist. A lot of times I think there are narcissists on these videos. I'm not suggesting that's the case. You get the idea. So that he can open himself up to a style of living that will be more fun for him, regardless of whether you guys are together or not. I can't imagine a scenario in which anybody's best possible life experience consists of his wife wanting to leave him but being incapable of doing so because she lacks the financial means. I can't imagine that any person, even an evil person, that's the optimal home environment for that. I just don't think that's probably the case. And so, if he's interested in being capable, right, of interacting in the relationship in a different way, of building new experiences, it might be an interesting thing. It's probably not going to be a quick fix, though. And if it's a quick fix, or if it's something he's doing to appease you or to signal to you that he's just trying, making an effort of some kind or something like that, don't bother. It'd be better just to go to a normal therapist, probably.
Yeah, that's like, with awareness school, it really is I want to figure out what I'm doing. I want to pay attention to things I haven't looked at before. I want to notice when I have a bad feeling, and then I want to notice how, I'm having a bad feeling because I'm using something outside of me to identify myself. And because this thing didn't go the way I wanted to, it stings in my identity center. Isn't that interesting? Is that serving me? Is this a helpful thing? It's just a systematic way of looking at why you think and feel and do the things that you do. And it's such a worthwhile journey for anyone to take, because, whether you were raised by a narcissist, whether you think that you are, attract them into your life, right? Because there are these perfect, narcissist victim dynamics where, you become so used to operating in that non-reality that you unconsciously attract a partner that is mirroring things about your parent that you wanted to get so far away from. And it's like, isn't this interesting? So if you find yourself in relationships with them, if you think that you might be one of them, if you think that there are tendencies and traits that you see in other people, and you definitely, if there is, what was it? Adamant innocence. Mm-hmm. If any of the things we've talked about tonight, if there's a part in your mind that's like, no, I definitely don't do that. It's definitely, they're the ones that do. If there's adamant innocence instead of, that's kind of interesting, I'm going to be on the lookout for that. Or I'm curious, let me think about it. If there's adamant innocence before there's actual, let me gather some data, might be an indication that there are some blind spots or some things that you're not able, right? Your identity could not handle you seeing it. And that's really what it is I am so afraid to look behind the curtain. I'm so afraid of what's back there. I'm so afraid of what I would see. So I need to create a diversion because that's, one of the narcissistic tendencies is being really good at creating a diversion in the conversation, taking it somewhere else without being able to nail down what slippery thing that they're doing to offset blame, to create this narrative. And that's really why it's such trouble, is because it's so hard to pin it down, because they're desperate for no one to pin it down. Right. They're desperate for no one to see this.
Well, the reason that a narcissist behaves the ways that they do, it's the same reason that anyone behaves the ways that they do. It's because it works. The tantrums work, right? The tantrums shut down the conversation. The tantrums get you so emotionally upset that you're more susceptible to whatever their nonsense is or whatever. And so a lot of it is making it so that, if another person's behaving in a way that I don't like, I need to understand, first of all, they're behaving in that way because they have either that behavior works or they've got reason to believe that behavior will work eventually. And if I can just get to the point where, if I can get to the point where I understand what it is that a deep part of them thinks that behavior is going to serve to achieve, and I can go, okay, that there is precisely what I'm not going to give you. Then I can begin, and this is this thing too. How do you handle a narcissist? You don't handle a narcissist. The thing is, I think you get really good at recognizing nonsense and dysfunction, and refusing to engage with it. That's it. So that you don't go into, I'm in narcissist handling mode here. It's just you like your inner eyeballs open up, the pupils dilate, right? And you start to take in so much information about what's transpiring, what's actually going on right here, right now. Not in this kind of paranoid analytical way. It's just this, I'm sensing what's happening here. It's immediately activating all the relevant memories that I have. I'm processing the totality of what's transpiring right here and right now. There's something not quite right about that. That's odd. That's strange. That's interesting. And I mean, I'm telling you, these people, like, it's very comfortable. Virginia Satir talked about this with schizophrenics, that it's very comfortable to draw a circle around the one that's hallucinating and say there's something wrong with her. There's something really wrong with her. And she got into family systems because her whole thing was that the parents of schizophrenic children frequently behaved in predictable pattern ways. And she kind of regarded, which is, from the constellation perspective, she regarded schizophrenia as kind of an adaptation to a certain type of family environment. And like Gregory Bateson had the double bind theory of schizophrenia. The idea being that if I look at one person in a family who's behaving outrageously, I go, they're the problem. There's this kind of interesting physical thing that's called stop chasing pain. I don't know if that's the name of it or if that's the tagline, but the idea is, my wrist hurts, do something to my wrist. And it's like a lot of the times, it's like the opposite shoulder is where the issue is, and you begin to kind of address stuff over here, it unravels things, and this feels better. Sometimes, like in the system, it's the people that are pointing the finger that are inadvertently contributing in really unhelpful ways. Now, the contribution may be a willingness to interact with the person who consistently behaves in ways that are not acceptable. And sometimes it's really useful to say, what if everything I believe about what's wrong with them is true? And what if there has to be something wrong with me in order for my response to what's wrong with them to be an impulse to fix it? Like would a saner version of myself simply want nothing to do with this person because of the manner in which this person behaves? That's an interesting question. I can't ask that question for you. I can ask it for me. I benefited immensely from asking myself that question. And so sometimes the solution is, and a lot of times people will persist in relationships with people because they're afraid of how guilty they'll feel if they cut them off. Or in their mind, the only option is engage with them and hold their tongue, engage with them and have blow-ups, or formally estrange from them. And it's like, formally estranging from a person is just another way of interacting with them. There's this other option, and this is this thing too. A lot of times people who don't talk to the narcissist family member, they are psychologically involved with that family member. They think about that family member all the time. They think about what that family member would think and say about them if they knew what they were doing. They think about what they're probably thinking and saying about them because of what they know about what they're doing and all this different stuff. That's a person who's still in the orbit. The physical interactions are kind of like the least important elements of a relationship. Some of the times the people we're most psychologically involved with, we only see once or twice a year.
What can the daughter of a narcissistic or emotionally immature mother do to break the patterns of doubting my own sense of reality and frequently blaming myself for negative outcomes, without going too far to the other extreme and assuming I'm always in the right?
Okay. So now and listen, this is a wonderful phrase called "I don't know." I don't know. Self-doubt is way different than I don't know. Self-doubt says, I know I don't know, or I know I make a lot of mistakes. Or self-doubt is pretending to know that you know you're going to make a terrible, unacceptable mistake. That's what self-doubt is. Versus genuine curiosity, which is I don't know. You do this thing where you have a model and you have an understanding about, what it is that you should do in a situation. And you say, well, my model tells me that what I should do is this. And you also go, and I got a model for understanding models, that sometimes models are wrong. Sometimes the model is very useful in certain contexts and not in other contexts. And so you get very comfortable in the realm of a healthy, honest person who is a person who spends most of their life not knowing for sure. Now, that doesn't mean that you've got to be in a constant state of self-doubt related anxiety. That's a completely different thing. And that's, I don't know why, and I don't know if you hear that, my watch talking to me. That is related to kind of like the bipolar thing of like, oh, I don't know, I'm so anxious, oh my gosh, tell me what to do, I'm so sorry, did I hurt you, did I hurt them, and all that. People who do that crap very often will then flop over to this other side, where when it's their turn to be right, they will not step away from the idea that they're right, regardless of what the data is. Now we're back to the whole thing about not responding to reality, which is that kind of narcissistic thing, where they have this weird internal like roller coaster ride, and when they're in one mode, oh my god, is it okay that I did that? Was I rude to her? Did she hear that the same way? I complimented her dress, but I know that she's sensitive about blah 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 blah. And oh my god, no, that that these really weird, and a lot of the times it is the narcissistic parents that will get hung up on these like obsequious concerns about other people's perception. Was she upset about that? And it was like she did nothing but nice things, and then she calls you 45 minutes later to make sure that nobody got upset about this or that, the other thing. Those are the same people who, when it's their turn to be right, they will not hear your perspective, regardless of how solid your perspective may be or how good you are at articulating it. Because something inside them, they won't say this outright, but something inside them goes, no, it's my turn to be right. And it's got nothing to do with reality. It's got to do with whose turn it is to play what role. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things. As a result of practicing the awareness stuff, as a result of not so much the material in the Ever Better Life course, but as a result of the conversations that we have over the course of awareness school, you'll get really good at telling the difference between a person who just thinks they're right now because of the facts and the data, and a person who their internal clock tells them it's their turn to be right. And that's, again, I'm telling you, the frustration is not, a difficult person is not a person who has different views than you do. The difficult person is the person whose sense that they are right is based upon something other than the stuff that we're talking about. It's based upon the fact, we actually had this a long time ago in a conversation where we were basically in an argument, and towards the end of the argument, you said something to me to the fact that like, well, that's not fair, you're always right. I never get to be right, or something like that. And I my ears kind of perked up, and I thought, okay, hang on. Is what you're saying to me that I force my opinion into the common space as the right opinion, regardless of whether that is the case or not? Or is what you're saying to me, you're uncomfortable with how often these conversations end in a conclusion, which is, oh, I see what you were saying. Oh, now what you're saying makes sense to me. And I think we determined it was that. Like and so this is a long time ago, but in your mind, arguments functioned thus. About half the time, I get to be right, you say sorry to me. And about half the time, you get to be right, I say sorry to you. And it doesn't really matter what it's about. It's staged, it's choreographed, it's ritualistic. It's a ritualistic disharmony. It's not actually caused by things out here, and it's not actually resolved by addressing things out here. It is an interplay that's going on here. I'll be the cowboy, you be the Indian. Okay, now I'll be the Indian, you be the cowboy. And
we talk about that in the relationship resolve class, about unspoken rules, right? It's one of these. We don't talk about it beforehand, but I have an unspoken rule that, this is a relationship, so it's half and half, and so I get up, there's like this programmed upsetness when it doesn't feel like it's even, and I don't even know why until he brought that to my attention. We actually started talking about it, and then the belief pops out. And that's the cool thing about doing this type of exploration, is you don't know the unspoken rules that you have about what you're supposed to do, what I'm supposed to do, how arguments are supposed to go, how interactions are supposed to go, until you see it, and then you're like, yeah, that's actually operated the whole time. I never thought to question it. Right? That's the robot thing. That's you're so expert at these patterns and these programs, you don't even realize you're doing it, because it doesn't feel like doing anything. It just feels like isness. It feels like this is just how it's supposed to be. And until you look at it and ask yourself, does this make sense? Is this the best way of doing it? Is my experience of this colored by, a dysfunctional environment? And if that's the case, it's like, oh, yeah, that's really weird. I have this very strong sensation that it's my turn to be right, but it's not. But when you lay out the facts of this particular situation we're talking about, I see how, I see that, in fact, the facts show that the way you're describing this is accurate. But I feel like I need to get my check mark. I need the gold star this time because you got it last time.
Because there's a psychological triumph in being right, and there's a psychological devastation in being wrong, which is that is what it's like in a lot of environments, in a lot of family environments. It's a bad thing to be wrong. It's a bad thing to change your mind. You're usually penalized for it, either in the moment or at some point in the future or whatever. Well, you remember you were wrong last time. And that was one of the rules we had to establish in this relationship very early on, was that that there was a tremendous reward, that the highest position that a person in this relationship could occupy is the position of, in the midst of an argument or a contentious conversation of any kind, suddenly realizing that, in fact, you were incorrect. What I mean by that is that your mind changes to reflect more of the other person's perspective and to immediately confess that to the other person. That's the highest possible, but that's like the ultimate one-upping thing that you could do, because we really wanted to psychologically incentivize that. Now, that's not me saying, listen, I think you're right, to make you feel good or to be a nice guy to you. And it's not you doing it to make me feel like, oh, well, she really respects me and my perspective. That's all bullshit. Don't you say that's all bullshit? That's all, like, just deal with the stupid ego stuff that makes you need that, so that it can now be two human beings. Do you know how successful, like, the average couple would be if it was just two human beings working together to deal with the challenges inherent to physical reality, and not two human beings with one hand, doing battle or building projects out here in physical reality, but one hand holding a shield up to protect against the other person's psychological bullshit that is going to come at any time? Well, what makes sense to do is just to go ahead and, makes sense just to buy the TV now. But I know the way his buying strategy works, he's going to get real upset if we do it now. So what we're getting, all that stupid, it would make sense to do it this way, but we can't do it that way because they've got hang-ups, and we can't even talk about it, because every time we talk about finances, then all of these things get triggered. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're going to die one day. Like the world is full of wonderful possibilities for you. And for me, it's kind of like, my whole life, it's like I felt like I watched people spill things on the floor, like there would be these issues, hot buttons, problems, reactivities, and everyone would just go, yeah, you can't talk about that, gotta watch out for that. And I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean you can't? Is that fixable? There's a hole in the floor here, there's a hole in the floor here, there's a hole in the floor here, and before you know it, you're walking like it's like Swiss cheese and all this different stuff. And it's like, what if we just dedicated a day or two and got just some plywood, nothing fancy, and just hammered down some really, thick plywood here so that we'd stop falling through these fucking holes in the floor, right? And that's kind of in the relationship. It's kind of like, if there's a hiccup, if there is a wrinkle, if there's a problem, just a minute. It seems like your understanding of reality and my understanding of reality on this issue is different, right? There's a difference in our understandings of what's true here. So can we maybe reconcile those understandings, or can we build an understanding in each of our minds that says, listen, hey, we've got different understandings of this area, so if we come on this area here, that other person may behave in ways that will be perplexing to me, inconsistent with my understanding of what's true. Now, what does that mean it's time to do? Time to fight? Is it time to fight? Is that what it's time? That's one of those things. Your criteria for knowing when it's time to get pissed off, when it's time to get really super defensive. Now it's time to set aside best practices and go to war. Now it's time to start yelling. Or now it's time not to start yelling. Now it's time to start stonewalling. Now it's time to start using cutting language. Now it's time to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop even trying to interact with you, not because I'm just tired of it or whatever. I'm going to stop interacting with you right now to signal to you the most hurtful thing I possibly can signal to you, which is, you know what? I don't even think it's worth talking to you, because I know that you're never going to change. I know you're never going to understand this. I know that you're just nuts, and so it's not even worth it. Little nasty stuff like that going on constantly. And then one looks around one's life and wonders why one hasn't made more progress in the directions they want to, or why one is so exhausted, or why one doesn't like their spouse. It's like, not surprising, because, how many times can your spouse be the source of the worst feelings that you experience in your life on a regular basis? Short of, the death of a loved one, which the nice thing about that is it usually only happens once. But you know what I'm saying? Like, if your partner is the source of most of the bad feelings, or is associated with most of the bad feelings that you experience on a recurring basis, how could you possibly expect to feel good feelings when they walk in the door? or as many good feelings as you would if they weren't consistently associated with those unpleasant emotions. Now, some of that's their behavior and some of it's maybe how you're processing it, but figuring out where the feelings that you don't want are coming from is a very useful thing. It's kind of like the most useful element of reality that you can understand in a lot of regards. I mean, once you've got like basic food acquisition and stuff down, and because then it begins to give you a choice. And that's really all this is about, is it's like, what would happen if we just took your situation, whatever your situation is, something's going well, something's going okay, something's going probably not so good, right? And what if into that situation we pump tremendous amounts of conscious choice, like your ability to notice what you're doing, to recognize it in a new way, and if you want to choose to do something a little bit different. I wonder how that environment would be affected by that. It's like if you've ever seen a pond and it's just like covered in like pond scum and it's like algae overgrowth. I don't know exactly what it is that happens, but is it anaerobic, like basically non-oxygen stuff, I think, gets on the pond and it proliferates and it kind of suffocates out the oxygen, or it suffocates out the balance, the normal stuff. What would happen if you just pumped tons of oxygen into that pond? Things would start to change. Oxygen is a little bit like conscious choice in that regard. It's like, what if I just perfused my psychological environment? And nothing miraculously changes overnight. Like, nobody's behavior just magically gets better all of a sudden. But it's like, go through that. You're going to go through this life. I mean, like the patterns that make up your current life, the fights, the difficulties, the frustrations. You're going to go through it again and again and again, one way or the other. The question is, are you going to go through it with a little bit more conscious awareness than you did last time? A little bit more capacity for conscious choice than you did last time? If you can go through the same old stuff as a slightly different version of yourself. And that difference, by the way, is not, well, I'm just overflowing with gratitude and niceness. And my husband is verbally abusive to me, but I just think about how nice it is that we have a beautiful house that I can get abused in. Not that. I'm talking about, you go through it as a person who is just a little bit more alert. And alert is a relaxed state. It's not an agitated state. It's that state that goes, there's something going on here. And there are aspects of what's going on here that I always notice. But there's also stuff going on here that I haven't ever noticed before. Now, what stuff going on inside my head, things that are happening. Now, what if I started to notice those things and to wonder about which of those things I could change in a way that would have a sort of positive change domino effect in my life? And it really does. It changes. When you notice new things, it changes your perception of your reality. You start to see your reality in a different way. It's not that your partner isn't an asshole. They might be an asshole. I don't know. There are. Listen, I go out into the world. I encounter assholes sometimes. Those assholes are married to people. You know what I'm saying? Like, they go home and there's a husband, there's a wife that person's interacting with. It's not that that's not a real thing. It's that it's like, okay, what do we have to change about your mind to make it so that your current unwanted situation kind of spits you out, sort of Jonah and the whale style? Like, what would it take for me to become kind of oil and water to the recurring patterns that I don't want to be experiencing anymore? Because there is a sense in which I'm kind of a match for what's going on presently. You don't have to be a law of attraction person, but what do I know for sure? The responses that I'm currently generating to my unwanted situation are not as yet changing that situation in the ways that I would like for that situation to be changed. Do I think that situation might be changeable? I think it probably is changeable. Do I think that there are responses that I could have that over a period of time would accumulate and begin to turn into those changes? That seems probably true. Okay, so given the fact that those two things are the case, and given the fact that what I'm doing now isn't producing that change, what's going on? What can I introduce into that environment that will increase the chances that the change-inducing responses will be generated? And I think it's awareness.
So there's narcissistic people, and if you notice these things, it makes you one also?
Now, that's what we call the opportunistically uncharitable misinterpretation. I don't know if sometimes things come across in a certain way in social media, and so I don't know to what extent that, but I'll tell you what that comment could have been. A nasty comment. I don't know, but it could have been. And if it is, but I'm scanning in my mind right now for something I could have said that would make a person in good faith think that what I'm saying is, if you notice that someone's a narcissist, that means that you're a narcissist. And I don't think that any reasonably intelligent person would derive that conclusion from anything that either of us have said here. And so I don't know if I'm misunderstanding the question or not. Or here's something about questions. Was that question an information gathering exercise, or was it a statement? Like, was it, were you expressing incredulity, or were you disagreeing with that question, or were you actually trying to gather information about it? Because I don't think, do you think that, is there
She
something?
said, no, curious.
Okay. Oh, great, fantastic. Thank you for telling me that. I don't think there are a lot of cases where you think a person in your life is a narcissist, right? Now, when I say you think, I'm not suggesting that you're wrong in thinking that. I'm just, what do I know for sure? I know that you think. I know that you think that they are, maybe they're not, right? Whatever it even means, right, to be the narcissist. But you see them, and you think something's going on with them. That's kind of very general, right? There probably is a there there. There probably are elements in their behavior that are inappropriate, and that kind of fall in the genre of what a lot of people commonly call narcissistic behavior. I'm not opposed to calling it narcissistic behavior, or of suspecting that a person is a narcissist, has narcissistic tendencies. I see a thing a lot where people get locked into the model. They call it that, and that is, rather than being a framework or a guide for thinking, it becomes an alternative to thinking. I'm wary of that. I have a general wariness of models, and so when I'm exhibiting kind of the wariness of the narcissist model, and of the ways in which maybe a lot of people seem to go wrong as a result of kind of embracing some level of understanding of that model, I'm not being critical of it in particular. I'm just sort of being like, pay attention to the behaviors, and for me it's so when I describe a person's behavior as like, God, that's narcissistic behavior, I always say to the person first, listen, it seems like what's happening is I'm describing to you how I'm feeling. How I'm feeling doesn't really fit into how you think I should be feeling. And because there's a mismatch between how I'm telling you I feel and how you think I should be feeling, what you're doing is you're pretending like I didn't tell you how I was feeling. You're pretending like I don't feel that way. And that's kind of narcissistic to me. That seems like classically narcissistic behavior. Do you understand that? Let me tell you why I think it's narcissistic behavior. Because you're not really responding to me. You seem to be responding and interacting in terms of a pre-existing commitment in your head. And when I tell you things that contradict what's in your head, you seem to just throw those things out. And that, to me, on its face, is sort of a disrespectful thing. It sort of seems to defeat the purpose of interpersonal relations, and it seems inappropriate and likely kind of under the category of sort of narcissism, because that's what narcissism is, isn't it? It's like you're an accessory. This is not like a 50-50 thing where we're communicating with each other. This is, I live in my world, you're kind of like furniture, you're living furniture. And so if you give me information...
There's a funny story. If one of my friends watches this, and here's... what did you say?
Living furniture?
Living furniture.
Okay. Is it weird?
Yes.
How did I know that? Yeah, so I hope that was clarifying. Thanks for actually telling me that you were curious. I appreciate that.
I think I have a better understanding now.
Yeah. There's not very many people who try to articulate this point. And so it's possible I didn't do a perfect job of doing it. It's also possible that it's just kind of it's a thing that isn't often described. But I can be skeptical of the model, and the chances that the person that you're thinking of is actually up to some kind of no good, probably very high that person's actually doing that stuff. The question then becomes, how can you do as much of what works in response to that person and as little as what doesn't as you possibly can? Part of it for me, this is just my opinion, is being really careful about using the model and not allowing the model to use me. Because I'll sometimes hear people say, well, if they're a narcissist, it doesn't matter what you do, you can't talk to them. And it's kind of like...
Actually, I think there was a person on this video earlier that said something like that.
People love to say that. They love to say that. And they'll say it as if... And now I'll tell you, it's a narcissistic kind of thing to do. Because this is not a video where we're saying, call your narcissist mother and just talk to her in the right way and everything will be fine. That's kind of a person that's just blurting something out, sort of non sequitur.
There was at least 2 comments of that nature.
That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That's stultifying. That's not smart. That's not an intelligent contribution to a conversation, because there was no point in this interaction. Did you see? But you see how when they're talking, they're not interacting with what's going on here. They've got things. They've got things in their head, and they're just going to say those things. It wasn't like I said you can make contact with them, just become competent, and you can. Nobody said anything like that. But which is a narcissistic behavior, which illustrates what I'm talking about. That a lot of people who are hardcore dogmatic, the narcissist can't be they're very narcissistic people. They are. That's my experience, and that's an example. The way they kind of spew that verbiage out and it doesn't really fit into the conversation.
Yes. So yeah. How do you interact with reality? How would you like to interact with reality? Creating a shared reality. That's one of the things, I think another point in that relationship module that we did. And it is. It's like, when am I actually interacting with my partner? Or when am I interacting with the stories in my head, right? Interacting with my early life experiences. And Awareness School helps you to sort through that. Oh, that's not what's actually happening. This is what happened. These are the words, and that's why it's helpful to have someone reflect it back to you. Like in Awareness School, we sit and we do group coaching. So you get to come on the Zoom and tell us about the situation. Tell us about the thing with your husband. Tell us about the thing with your son-in-law. Tell us the story and describe it. Describe how you feel, and then we'll get to see stuff about how you are experiencing them, figure out, okay, how much of it seems to be objectively coming from them, how much of it is coming from your version of reality in your own head, and were you aware that you had a version of reality in your own head? Were you aware of the way that you just described that thing? I mean, the last couple of meetings from this last class, there were just moments where it was like, okay, let's talk about the way you just described this, and let's see, is there something there that you're not seeing about your model of reality that just seemed like just the facts about the situation and how bad it was? But actually, once we kind of pulled the threads a little bit and saw what was behind the extreme emotional reaction, we saw, oh, it was a model of reality. Oh, it was a distortion. Oh, this wasn't just like the strong emotion that I have. It feels so real. It feels so definite. It feels so serious. But when you see that it's built on an unresourceful belief, something that if you actually consciously look at it, you're like, I actually don't really believe that. I actually don't think that's helpful. It's actually really weird now that I see the connection between my large emotional reaction and that thing that was unconsciously driving that emotional reaction behind the scenes of my mind. Now I'm feeling a little bit like sheepish and a little bit like, oh, that was I had no idea. I mean, that's what you sign up for Awareness School to get that, to see other people go through those experiences, because it's very powerful to see it happen, and then you can see things in yourself, and then you have the opportunity to have those moments throughout the class where you're like, oh yeah, I was doing that. I didn't realize that. Steve will say, watch back the tape at 1 hour and 27 minutes. Watch your facial expression. Watch what you said. Watch how you didn't answer the question. Notice that, right? It's really so priceless.
And the thing there is not, hey, listen, I'm the boss and I saw it happen, so you go look and see what I saw. I want to see what you see when you look at what I was looking at minute 73 on the meeting. Like, what happened? I want to know what happened. I want to know if you see what I see, because maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I saw something that wasn't actually there. I don't think so, but I want to test it. I want to really find out. It's the group meetings are really great because it's a little bit like if you learn anatomy in a textbook. Human anatomy in a textbook. I couldn't really do it. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. It was flat, two-dimensional. But if you go to a cadaver lab, which is something we actually did, like as part of like chiropractic school, you go and you cut the body up and look in there, right? It's different. You see the stuff and it's like, wow, it's got like a three-dimensional reality to it, And in the same way, like in physiology class, we're talking about little, ATPs doing all this different stuff. But when you go in and you look at the body and you see the anatomy there and someone describes the physiology to you, you see this anatomy, this does this, and then physiologically, that means like, what does the anatomy do? Like anatomy in action is sort of the physiology stuff. It's different. But imagine if you could see a living body, all of its pieces and parts, right? But you could actually witness it when it was not dead on a cadaver. It was actually happening in real time. I mean, it's a different thing. It's as different as seeing the body on the slab as compared to the book. Like if you could actually see inside of a living body somehow with technology or something like that and watch as different things were interacting. That's a little bit what like this class is like psychologically. It's that you begin to see what people are doing. And as a person describes what their problem is, you find out what the problem actually is. And it's the way that they always end their sentences. They always end their sentences on a down note. It's the tone of voice. That's actually where their experience is coming from. And that's what's kind of creating a lot of the issues that exist in their life. The thing, and kind of going back to you can't change the narcissist thing, whether you can change them or not, there's a lot of people who aren't worth interacting with. I believe that to be true. And that's not to say that what that means is that the costs of interacting with them, a lot of which are opportunity costs, right, are not worth the juice that comes from the squid. It's just not worth it, right? That if you spend the weekend with the person who makes you feel like absolute shit for a week after interacting with them, the opportunity cost of that is the week and the experiences during that week you would have had you not interacted with that person. And people sell this short. They really do. Like it's really easy to underestimate the invisible costs that you're paying as a result of maintaining relationships with dysfunctional people. It's extreme, because you don't know how good you would feel if you didn't deal with that bullshit. And you don't know what would happen if you had 3 weeks of feeling that good, 3 weeks of none of that bullshit. It's not just that there's no bullshit. It's that when that bullshit is gone, and when those bad feelings are gone, you spend a little time just going, Jesus Christ, it's a relief not to be dealing with that. And then after a while, you stop saying that to yourself. And after a while, it just starts to be the new normal. But then from that new normal begins to spring all sorts of interesting things, like creativity. You know what I think I'd like to do? I think I'd like to do that. Like your entire mind's predictive capacity can be absorbed trying to envision in advance and war game. How might they get upset? What might they be upset about? What am I going to say if they get upset about this? How will I defend them if they get upset about that? How will I talk them down if they get their feelings hurt about that? Oh my God, well, we got to think about this. Well, I'd like to go see your parents for Christmas, but you know, my parents and all this different, all that, like when your mind is wargaming that bullshit, it's not wargaming how to make you money. It's not wargaming what you want to do in the next phase of your life, or what sort of experiences you want to help your children have that will let them go into adulthood and as full, happy, creative, excited, productive people. The thing is, you value your experience enough, and this is this thing too. You don't owe anybody anything. I mean, maybe you owe somebody some money. You don't owe anyone your soul. Like, you don't owe anyone an infinite amount of your attention and energy and time. You just don't. And if and there isn't a person in your life with whom interacting is a given. No adult child, no parent-in-law, no sibling, no nothing. There is no person that you are obligated to interact with if interacting with that person is a soul-crushing experience for you. I mean, minor children, okay, maybe that's a different situation. Outside of that, though, right? And even in there's a lot of shenanigans that go on in those environments, right? But these people go through life pretending that they have to interact with these people because of who the people are to them. And a lot of the time it's because they lack the courage to actually cut those people out. And a lot of that is because they're afraid of how they'll make themselves feel if they do that. A lot of it is because they don't know exactly what they're going to do. When you get good at putting up with bullshit, there's a part of you that wants to keep putting up with bullshit because you're good at it. Even if it makes you miserable, even if it doesn't pay very well. That'll be true no matter what you get good at doing. And so sometimes it's worth kind of like, cauterizing that wound there and saying, fuck, I hate to retooling my mind. It's so painful and it's so laborious and it sometimes takes such a long time. But I want my mind to get good at making money or creating art or interfacing with reality in a way, instead of predicting what my mother's next tantrum is going to be about. This is that thing, and this is kind of awareness school, is that personal freedom is when you sit down and you say, I want my mind to get really good at doing something else. Right now, my mind's really good at figuring out how to doubt it myself. Right now, my mind's really good at figuring out how every bad thing that happens must be my fault. Right now, my mind's really good at anticipating everybody else's needs and making sure nobody's inconvenienced ever in any way whatsoever. It's like, well, unless you're working at like 5-star hospitality industry, it's probably not really fulfilling for you to be doing that. And so recognizing that you do have this opportunity to get your mind to be good at something else is, it's just a wonderful thing. And I think that thing too, we do become numb to the prices that we've been paying for a really long time. And it is easy to underestimate the cost of maintaining the relationships that are currently going on. And sometimes people aren't worth continuing to interact with. And that's not your fault. That's not something to feel bad about. That's something to recognize and act upon. You're not responsible for the fact that that's true. You're not responsible for the fact that that their behavior makes them not worth interacting with. Whose responsibility is it? Probably it's theirs. It's your responsibility to figure out how to feel okay about the fact that that's what's true and take action if that's what's appropriate for you to do.
Yes. Well, let's wrap it here because we are going to go to the town. We have awareness school starting a week from tomorrow. It will be at 4 p.m.
I don't know why. I can't. I'm touching something. I don't know what it is.
4 p.m. Pacific time for the next 10 weeks. with a few Saturday classes sprinkled in. Very fun little bonus thing I'm doing. It's, if you want to, in addition, so Awareness School is the 10 module Ever Better Life course that you have access to. You go through that independently, and then on Mondays we meet and we do group coaching where you, after you've gone through the module, you see what it brings up for you, you come and talk about life stuff, and we apply the principles from the course to your life stuff. And so a lot of people, you know, come to my page because they're interested in GNM and understanding the biological laws and understanding their conflicts. And so then they see this thing we teach called Awareness School, and we highly recommend Awareness School for everyone, and especially if you're trying to unravel your stuff, right? Unravel your conflicts, unravel your patterns of self-devaluation or identity stuff, because what are conflicts made out of? They're made out of models in your head. They're made out of ideas. They're made out of thoughts. They're made out of moments of conflicting situations that were more than you could handle. You made beliefs and decisions about how life was going to be from that point on. And when you can look and observe how conflicts play out in your life, you start to get a lot of clues about how you can resolve them, downgrade them, transform them, make them irrelevant, right? A conflict is resolved when it's irrelevant to you, when it can't happen again. And when you see the things that you've been doing, that's just like, wow, that doesn't work. And I don't even feel, you know, this, I'm not taking it personally anymore. I can see it objectively. And now I realize I can laugh about it genuinely. That's when the thing is resolved. And so Awareness School is tremendously helpful for helping you to get to that point. But it's not specifically, it's not about GNM. And so people who are interested in GNM, who are applying GNM to their life, come to Awareness School to learn awareness. But if you also want to do, you know, ask about symptoms and talk about the biological laws, I'm going to do a class just for people who are in Awareness School or who have taken it in the past for 7 Mondays at 11 o'clock Pacific time, where you can come if you're in Awareness School or have taken it in the past, and we'll do GNM coaching, because my one-on-one spots are totally booked for the rest of the year for the most part, and so I wanted to make an opportunity for people to get some GNM stuff along with Awareness School. So that's a fun new thing I'm doing. I will be putting a page up about it soon. And yeah, that's our night. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching, and let us know if you have any questions. And Pearl's ready to snuggle.
Here's Pearly Whirly.
Good night.
Bye.
Let's see if I can shut this off.